Okay, so today uh, the first lesson is called the approach play. What the approach play is basically it's about the stuff that happens before an attack. So during an attack, you want a lot of your pieces um, participating and aiming at your target. But in order for that to happen, you have to maneuver your pieces uh, in a way that they can attack. So when analyzing this position right now, uh, White has a pretty good position. White has two pawns in the center that are more advanced than Black's pawns. Uh, White has two developed knights, and the bishops are also pretty good, have pretty good positions, while Black's bishops are very passive and they aren't controlling any uh, major diagonals. And also, Black's knight on a5 is on the edge of the board and is not doing anything right now. So in this position, White it looks pretty good for White to try and do something to Black right now. So what White does in this position is to play g4. So White wants to move the G and F pawns up in order to damage or weaken Black's castle. And by moving to G4, White hopes to play something like F5 or G5 and G6 to try and target Black's castle. So then Black plays Knight D7, basically trying to defend himself by moving the knight to f8 and also opening up the f pawn to advance. And one thing to note here is that knight c4, even though it looks pretty good for Black, wouldn't have really worked to stop White from attacking. So after bishop c1, e5 and knight f5. So right now, White's knight on f5 is pretty strong. And after Black exchanges, well, Black takes the pawn on f4 and White advances the pawn to f5. White still has an attack. So instead, Black opted to defend himself by allowing the f pawn to advance forward. So then after knight d7 is bishop g2. So now what White wants to do is allow the queen potentially in the future move g5 and queen h5 to try and get the queen on the h file and attack the h pawn. So then Black moves bishop f8 and White actually moves queen e1. So now when White moves queen e1, he wants to move queen h4. And also after the queen goes to h4, White's plan would basically consist of advancing the f and g pawns and doing a rook lift. So rook f3 and rook h3 and attacking this pawn, which is the weak point in Black's castle right now. So then Black advances b6. So Black wants to develop this bishop to b7 and try to counterattack White from that diagonal. And White develops the rook onto the d file. Black develops the bishop. And basically both sides are trying to maneuver their pieces. So White wants to maneuver his pieces to attack Black on the king side, while Black wants to maneuver his pieces to defend the king side and try and counterattack on the center through the bishop and the two center pawns. So right now, white moves knight d e2, so hoping to move the knight somewhere like g3, and then try use that post to attack f5 and support f5. And then black tries to trade queens. So when attacking, your queen is your most important piece. It's the most powerful piece. So it's often the piece that does the most work in an attack. So what the defending side often tries to do is try to trade queens, because if the queens are gone, then white has the most powerful attacking piece is gone, and it's easier to defend. So then white moves g5 and black moves f6. So right now, white spots the weakened f6 pawn. So then, because after black moves to f6, this pawn is weakened. So then white tries to exploit that by moving knight d4 to attack the pawn. And black moves f takes g5. And white takes back. And then black moves his knight down to c6 to try and attack this knight. And white moves rook d f2. Let's see. So then after black moves rook c8. So the purpose of rook c8 is because if black tries to do something like knight takes d4, so eliminating the knight on d4 and to prevent him from attacking the e6 pawn, and also just trading pieces, because when you're attacking or when you're defending, you want to trade pieces and a lot. So then if black plays knight takes d4, then white would play take back. And after knight e5, and then white captures. Now after the pawn takes and the rook goes to f7, white has control of the 7th rank, which is very strong, especially when white is trying to attack black. So then right now in this position, black's position is pretty stuck, because he can't really do much. And also black has weakened, has doubled isolated pawns, so these pawns are weak. So instead, black plays rook c8 to move rook c7 and defends this rank. And white plays knight ce2 to support this knight. And then it's basically a maneuvering game. So right now, black plays knight e5 and white plays knight takes e6. And then, so white sacrifices the knight to try and open up the position. So then after trading the, actually no, white doesn't sacrifice the knight. White takes the pawn because then it allows white to trade the 2 rooks for a queen. So right now, white has, if we look at the material on the board, white has an extra queen in exchange for 2 rooks. And white also has 2 extra pawns. So this position looks pretty good for white because of the two extra pawns, and also because black's rooks can't really coordinate right now uh, because of the uh, minor pieces on the board, and also because there isn't really any open files except for the F file, but that's blocked by the F pawn right now. So black's rooks can't really do anything right now. So let's see. So instead, black plays knight c5, and then and then white trades the knight on c6, and then white moves the knight to d4 to try and attack this square again, and white moves the pawn down to e5, so sacrificing the pawn or allowing it to be captured, so that black's position is weakened. And it also opens up this square for the bishop. So if this knight moves away, then say here, then white can play bishop e4 and attack this pawn. So let's see, black takes the pawn and white moves knight f3. So he wants to take this pawn back and gain an outpost on e5 and attack black from there. So then after bishop e6, black takes, and now so after a few moves, white has a pretty strong attack on black right now, because of these two rooks having control over the files, and also the queen and the knight and the pawn, uh, all being very close to the black king, and being able to threaten black from these positions. So then black moves king h8 to try and get off this g file, and white moves queen h3. So now, so the purpose of moving queen h3 is to open up the g file or allow g6, because previously black's queen was pinning this pawn to the queen. So after queen h3, now white wants to play g6. And there really isn't anything that white can do about it, black can do about it, because if black tries to stop by playing g6, now the dark diagonal is open. So then white can play bishop f4, and white has ideas on the on this diagonal by playing bishop e5. So I guess, for example, if black plays rook a7 now, white plays bishop e5 check, black moves the bishop, and then white moves bishop f6. Now it's a pretty strong attack for white because white's threatening queen h7. And so basically, moving g6 would weaken the dark squares. So then black plays queen d5, white plays g6, and black plays h6. And now this position is it's set up for an attack. So just what are some moves that white can do to start the attack on black's king right now? So just could you brainstorm some ideas of moves that white can do? And you don't really need to calculate a winning a winning line. Just some aggressive moves from white to open up the black king uh, are enough. So just take a look at white's black's pawn structure. So right now, black uh, has a pawn on g7 and h6, which are the really the only things that are um, stopping white from attacking. So how can you get rid of these pawns? So right now, in the game, white started the attack by sacrificing his bishop. So moving bishop takes h6. And what this move does is that it opens up the h file, because after g takes h6 and knight takes h6, now black's king is very weak right now, because there's no pawns in front of the king anymore. And white has uh, three pieces, all attacking the king side. So after bishop takes h6 and knight takes h6, g takes h6 and then knight takes h6, white plays. Actually, did white play that? Um, oh, actually, there's an even stronger attack for white. So right now, instead of playing uh, g takes h6, white plays g7 check. So now, after g7, black has to take this pawn, because otherwise, well, this pawn will be taking this bishop anyways, if black doesn't do that. And now after this pawn is gone, white actually, the rook on g2 is actually very strong, because it's stopping this king from moving to the g file. So then after g7, white responds bishop g7. So now what are some ways for white to attack black and open up the king for black king?
Queen to h6.
So not the queen because the bishop's defending it. However, your idea is correct. So what's another way to attack black?
Knight h6.
Yeah. So after knight takes h6, now there isn't any pawns in front of the black king anymore, and black's king is really not in a very good position right now. And white's attacking black, and it doesn't look good for black. So then after knight takes h6, white plays queen takes g2, queen takes g2 check, and after that, where white takes back and black takes the knight on h6, then white forks the bishop and rook on by moving queen g6, and now this position is very good for white because white has a queen for 2 rooks and a rook for a knight. So white's ahead in material. White also has a passed pawn on the h file, which not only it's not only an extra pawn, but it's also defending his king. So even though black has 2 rooks, they can't really do anything to attack, try to perpetual check the king. And also, black's king is out in the open. So white has a lot of tricky things that they can do with the king. So white could potentially fork the king, or fork the king and another piece, or so black has to be careful of that. Or white can also just attack the king and threaten to checkmate it, and then force black to defend the king instead of trying to counterattack. So this position is very good for white, and it's white has then a winning endgame. So that was that, but the reason that black needed to take the the g2 rook because he calculated that if he didn't do that, he would lose. So if black simply ignored the stretch and played something like a5, what's one way for white to attack black?
Knight f5 check.
Knight f5 check, and then king g8.
How about rook g7?
So after rook, actually the rook's pinned by this queen. So white actually can't take the bishop on g7. So actually, knight f5 isn't the correct move, but the idea of moving the knight is correct. So where else can the knight move?
Knight f7.
Yeah, so knight f7 check. And here, what can white do?
Queen h8.
Yeah, so queen h8, and it's checkmate, because this rook is pinning this bishop, and this knight supporting the queen, and this rook on f1 is defending the knight. So it's actually a checkmate. So black couldn't really do that. So then another thing. So what if black takes the knight on h6?
Queen h6. Check.
Yeah, so queen h6 and rook h7. And then this is the checkmating position. White can checkmate black right now. So finds the checkmate. There's actually many ways for white to do that.
Rook f8 check.
So rook f8 check, and then after rook takes f8.
Queen takes f8.
Yeah, so queen takes f8, checkmate. So that is basically why black was forced to play queen takes g2, because if he didn't, then white would checkmate black. However, there's actually, so bishop takes h6 was the best move for black. However, there was actually knight takes h6 also would have worked, because after g takes h6 and bishop takes h6, then the exchange still would have happened. And if white doesn't do that, so I mean, if black doesn't do that, so if black plays something like king g8, so I guess then what can white do in this position to gain an advantage over black?
g7.
So g7, that would black would be able to play. So black would play something like rook bishop d6, and here white can't really do anything to attack black. So let's see, what are some other things that white can try to do? And remember that you don't have to go for a
Bishop
checkmate.
f8.
So bishop f8, and then after rook takes f8.
Queen h7.
Queen h7. Let's see. So if Queen h7, the rook is defending the h7 square. So then black doesn't really have or white doesn't really have an attack anymore. And even if white tries something like, let's see. So if white tries something like g takes h7 and rook takes f8, white can, or black can simply perpetual check white. So if white isn't careful, black can actually force a draw. But however, bishop takes f8 is, or rook takes f8 is uh, a good, is the correct move. So there isn't really a way for white to checkmate black, but there's a way for white to gain material here. And it has something to do with the G pawn. So how can white threaten to promote the G pawn and force black to take it with the rook? And also prevent black from perpetual checking white. And one more thing is that well, white's forced to take the rook right now, because otherwise the rook will take the rook back. So then, in this position, how can white force black to give up the rook for the pawn?
Queen H8.
So after Queen H8, Black will just move King E7. And even if White tries something like G7, Black will simply perpetual check White. But instead, there's another forcing move you can do in this position. In this position, the best way for White to win material is actually to move G7. So threatening to promote. And after Black takes, how can White win material now?
Queen H8.
Yeah, so then Queen H8. Well, then if let's say Black tries to go King F7.
Queen takes G7.
Yeah, so then Queen takes G7. And right now, well, it's White's move right now, and White can stop Black from perpetual checking by just doing something like a Queen G4 and defending this square. And right now, White has a rook in exchange for a knight, and also White has an extra pawn. So White's position is pretty good. Even if it isn't as good as if White had played bishop takes h6, White is still winning. And White has a pretty comfortable endgame because all White has to do is advance his pawn, and Black can't really stop it because, because Black only has a queen and a knight to try and defend this. So I guess moving on to the next idea is the king in the middle game. So basically, one way to use the king in the middle game. So right now, White's position is very strong. So I guess if you analyze this position, you will see that even though both sides are equal in material, White's pieces are far stronger than Black's. So White's queen is in the middle of Black's castle and attacking the dark squares. White's rook is on the D rank and controlling this 7th rank, and White's other rook is supporting it on the open D file. And White's knight has the potential to go to spaces like G5 and attack Black. And meanwhile, Black's pieces are very locked down and passive. So Black's queen, even though it's it's pinning this knight to this pawn, isn't really doing anything else. And White's bishop is also not doing anything other than threatening, other than pinning this knight to the pawn. And White's rooks are, Black's rooks are also useless. So Black's rook on E8 isn't doing anything, and Black's rook on F8 is stuck watching this F7 pawn. And if you look at the pawn structures, Even though white has two doubled pawns, white has a strong e pawn, and black's pawn structure on the king side is very weak because they're advanced, and white's queen is in the dark, exploiting the dark squares. So right now, it looks like white should be winning. However, white just needs one extra push to win. So then here, white plays. Most of white's pieces are good, but white actually has one more piece that isn't really doing anything, um, and that is a king. So even though it's a middle game, white actually uses the king to try to attack black by moving king h2. So I guess what's white's goal by moving king h2 right now? So what does white want? Where does white want the king to go? And remember that black's dark squares especially are very weak. So how can white make use of this with the king? So basically, white's idea by moving the king to h2 is to advance it to g3, f4, g5, and then h6. So right now, even though it's a middle game, white is using the king to try and attack black's king. And this is possible because black's position is very locked down. Again, because white's rook is useless, is stuck watching the f pawn, and black's queen can't really move anywhere. So even though it's along this diagonal, these spaces are all controlled by white. And so I guess we'll be looking at this more next time because it's almost time for the tournament to start.